The return of the dead, the impossible detection, the warning klaxons aboard the Zarian dreadnought. Eternal dominance screamed through corridors that had known only victory for the past 6 months. Admiral Kresh pressed his four-fingered hands against the tactical display, his scaled features reflecting the crimson glow of emergency lighting. What he was seeing violated everything he understood about the fundamental laws of physics and warfare. "Run the scan again," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets across 17 star systems. The bridge crew, a mix of various alien species united under the Zarian Empire's banner, moved with practiced efficiency despite the obvious tension crackling through the air. Senior Sensor Technician Yilara, her crystalline fingers dancing across holographic controls, shook her head in bewilderment. "Admiral, I've run the scan 14 times. The results are consistent. There are 43 human vessels in the Ash Nebula, maintaining standard formation patterns. The silence that followed was the kind of profound quiet that occurs when trained military professionals are confronted with something that should be impossible." Admiral Kresh had personally witnessed the complete annihilation of the human fleet at the Battle of Titan's Edge. He had watched their ships burn. He had confirmed the debris fields. He had filed the victory reports himself. Those ships were destroyed, he stated flatly, as if saying it with enough conviction could somehow make the sensor readings disappear. "I watched them die. We all did." The main holographic display updated with tactical information that made the situation even more disturbing. The human ships weren't just present, they were arranged in a defensive formation that suggested they were not only operational but actively scanning the surrounding space. Their energy signatures matched the exact specifications of the vessels that had been reduced to cosmic dust half a year ago. Communications Officer Nexus, whose species communicated through a complex series of harmonic frequencies, managed to convey extreme distress through his translation matrix. "Admiral, the vessels are broadcasting standard human identification codes. They're requesting permission to approach for diplomatic discussions." Kresh felt his secondary heart skip a beat. Diplomatic discussions. As if the complete violation of physical laws wasn't disturbing enough, the humans apparently wanted to chat about it. Put them through, he decided, figuring that if reality was going to become completely unreasonable, he might as well embrace the experience fully, first. Contact with the impossible. The communication channel opened with the familiar crackle of long-range transmission equipment. What followed was a voice that sounded perfectly calm and reasonable, which somehow made everything infinitely more unsettling. "Zarian Command, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Starship Phoenix. I know this might come as something of a surprise, but we'd like to discuss recent events. Specifically, that whole being completely destroyed thing that happened a few months back." Admiral Kresh looked round his bridge with the expression of someone whose carefully ordered universe had just been rearranged by cosmic forces with a sense of humor. His crew was displaying various species-specific signs of confusion and stress. Some were checking their equipment, others were consulting religious texts, and at least one was discreetly updating their personal will. "Captain Chen," Kresh replied, activating the outgoing transmission with the kind of careful precision typically reserved for defusing explosive devices. "Our records indicate that your vessel was completely destroyed at the Battle of Titan's Edge, along with the rest of your fleet." "Oh, we were," Chen confirmed cheerfully, as if complete molecular dissolution was merely a minor inconvenience worth mentioning in passing. "Quite thoroughly, actually. Very impressive display of firepower, by the way." The synchronized plasma bombardment was particularly elegant. Must have taken weeks to coordinate that level of precision. The tactical officer, a young Zarian named Vorth, who had been promoted specifically because of his performance during the human fleet's destruction, leaned forward with obvious confusion. "Captain, if your vessels were destroyed, how are you currently speaking to us?" "Excellent question," Chen replied, and Admiral Kresh could practically hear her smiling through the transmission. "See, the thing about humans is that we have this annoying habit of learning from our mistakes. When you folks taught us that our traditional approach to fleet operations had some significant vulnerabilities, we decided to address those issues. The Emergency Council convenes 2 hours later. Admiral Kresh found himself in the most uncomfortable position of his military career, explaining the impossible to people who were paid to make informed decisions based on reliable information. The emergency session of the Galactic Dominion High Council was being held via quantum communication links that connected 17 different star systems, each represented by their most senior military and political leaders. The central chamber of the council station hummed with the kind of nervous energy typically associated with natural disasters and family reunions. Holographic representatives from across the galaxy flickered into existence around the circular assembly area, each species bringing their own particular approach to processing information that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality. Counselor Vex of the Zenthari Confederacy, whose people approached problems with mathematical precision and philosophical thoroughness, spoke first. "Admiral Kresh, please summarize the situation for those who may have missed the initial reports." Activated the central holographic display, which showed the tactical readings from the Ash Nebula encounter. 6 hours ago, our long-range sensors detected a human fleet consisting of 43 vessels in the prohibited zone surrounding the Ash Nebula. These vessels match the exact specifications of the ships we destroyed at Titan's Edge. High Commander Ithex of the Beryllian Military Conclave, a species known for their direct approach to warfare and their complete inability to appreciate subtlety, interrupted with obvious skepticism. "Match the specifications, how exactly? Are we talking about similar designs, or are we suggesting that identical vessels have somehow materialized from nothing?" Identical Kresh confirmed, though saying it aloud made him feel like he was describing a particularly vivid nightmare. Same hull configurations, same energy signatures, same quantum resonance patterns. "According to our analysis, these are not similar ships. These are the same ships." The holographic chamber filled with the kind of multilingual chaos that occurs when 17 different species simultaneously attempt to express disbelief in their native languages. Translation matrices across the galaxy sparked and crackled as they tried to process concepts that seemed to exist outside established logical frameworks. Dr. Nethes, the Dominion's chief xenobiologist and one of the few beings in the galaxy who had attempted to study human psychology in any systematic way, raised what passed for a hand among her species. "Has anyone considered the possibility that our understanding of human technology may have been incomplete?" The Phoenix Rises, the suggestion hung in the digital air like a particularly unwelcome revelation. The Galactic Dominion had built its entire strategic doctrine around comprehensive intelligence about member species' capabilities. The idea that they might have fundamentally misunderstood human technology implied levels of ignorance that made everyone professionally uncomfortable. Admiral Kresh consulted his tactical data with obvious reluctance. "We've been monitoring human communications since the initial contact. Captain Chen has requested a formal diplomatic meeting to discuss what she calls mutual misunderstandings about the nature of human fleet operations. Counselor Vex performed what his species considered either deep contemplation or the early stages of a philosophical breakdown. What exactly did she mean by that? Before Kresh could respond, his communications officer's voice crackled through the council chamber's audio systems. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from the human fleet. They're broadcasting on all Dominion emergency frequencies simultaneously." The main display shifted to show Captain Sarah Chen standing on what was unmistakably the bridge of a human starship. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, with the kind of calm confidence that suggested she was either completely in control of the situation or completely insane. Given the circumstances, either possibility was equally disturbing. "Greetings, Galactic Dominion High Council," she began with a smile that managed to be both friendly and slightly predatory. "I apologize for the unconventional nature of our return, but we thought it was important to address some misconceptions about human technology before they led to further difficulties." Dr. Nethes leaned forward with obvious scientific interest. "Captain Chen, our records indicate that your fleet was completely destroyed. How do you account for your current existence?" "Simple," Chen replied, as if the question was perfectly reasonable instead of completely mind-bending. "We weren't actually there when you destroyed us." The distributed consciousness revelation. The silence that followed this statement was so complete that several council members checked their communication equipment to ensure the transmission hadn't been interrupted. The concept Chen had just casually mentioned seemed to violate not just military doctrine, but several fundamental assumptions about consciousness, identity, and the nature of existence itself. High Commander Ethex was the first to recover. "Captain, are you suggesting that the vessels we destroyed were unmanned?" "Oh no, they were fully manned," Chen corrected with obvious amusement. 43 ships, complete crews, full operational capacity. You folks did a very thorough job of turning us into our component atoms. We felt every bit of it." Admiral Kresh felt his primary heart skip several beats. The implications of what Chen was suggesting began to percolate through his consciousness like a particularly unpleasant revelation. "You felt it. Distributed consciousness technology," Chen explained as if she were discussing something as mundane as weather patterns. "Each of our crew members exists simultaneously across multiple quantum states. When you destroy one manifestation, the others continue operating. It's like having backup copies, except they're all equally real and equally aware." Dr. Nethes was frantically updating her xenopsychology databases, trying to process concepts that seemed to exist in a completely different philosophical framework than anything in her research. "You're saying that human consciousness can be replicated across multiple physical forms?" "Not replicated," Chen corrected patiently. "Distributed. I'm not a copy of Sarah Chen. I am Sarah Chen. Just as the Sarah Chen you killed at Titan's Edge was also Sarah Chen. We're all the same person, experiencing existence from multiple perspectives simultaneously." The technological implications of this revelation began to cascade through the assembled council members, like a carefully orchestrated intellectual avalanche. If humans had developed true consciousness distribution, it meant that their approach to warfare, diplomacy, and existence itself operated on principles that the Galactic Dominion had never encountered. Counselor Vex performed rapid calculations on his personal analysis systems. "Captain, this technology would represent advances in quantum consciousness theory that our most advanced species have deemed theoretically impossible." "Theoretically impossible for you," Chen replied with cheerful precision. Humans have always had a somewhat casual relationship with the word impossible. We prefer to think of it as a challenge rather than a limitation. Strategic implications. Admiral Kresh was beginning to understand why human diplomatic history had been so consistently unpredictable. If their personnel could literally experience multiple simultaneous existences, it meant that traditional approaches to negotiation, intimidation, and warfare were based on assumptions that simply didn't apply. "Captain Chen," he said carefully, "what are the strategic implications of this technology?" "Well," Chen replied, consulting what appeared to be a standard military datapad, "it means that when you attack human forces, you're not really eliminating them, you're teaching them. Every time you destroy one of our fleets, the others learn from the experience. We get to analyze your tactics, your weapons, your coordination protocols, and your strategic thinking." The holographic chamber filled with the kind of profound silence that occurs when military professionals simultaneously realize that their most significant victory might actually have been their most catastrophic strategic error. "High Commander," Ithek spoke with obvious reluctance, "you're saying that the Battle of Titan's Edge was a learning experience for humanity?" "One of our most educational engagements ever," Chen confirmed with satisfaction. "We learned more about Dominion military capabilities in those 4 hours than we had in the previous 6 months of diplomatic exchanges. Very informative. We've incorporated your techniques into our own tactical doctrine." Dr. Nethes was running probability calculations that were beginning to produce results that made her want to reconsider her career choices. "Captain, how many human fleets currently exist with this distributed consciousness capability?" Chen paused, and in that pause, every member of the Galactic Dominion High Council experienced the kind of existential dread typically reserved for discovering that one's carefully planned retirement has been indefinitely postponed by cosmic forces beyond their control. "That's an interesting question," she replied eventually. "See, once consciousness becomes truly distributed, traditional concepts, like how many, become somewhat arbitrary. Let's just say that the 43 ships you're currently detecting represent a very small fraction of human operational capability." The implications of this statement began to percolate through the council chamber, like a particularly unwelcome revelation spreading through a dinner party. If human technology allowed for true consciousness distribution across multiple quantum states, it meant that everything the Dominion thought they knew about human population, military strength, and strategic capabilities might be not just wrong, but deliberately misleading. Admiral Kresh looked around the holographic chamber with the expression of someone whose carefully ordered universe had been rearranged by forces that seemed to find the concept of impossible personally offensive. The other council members were displaying various species-specific signs of what could generously be called educational trauma. The new reality, Captain Chen, Councillor Vex, began with the kind of diplomatic precision that suggested he was either trying very hard to maintain professional composure or experiencing a minor philosophical breakdown. What exactly does humanity want from the Galactic Dominion? Chen's expression became more serious, though she maintained the kind of calm confidence that suggested she was operating from a position of considerable strength. "Counselor, we want what we've always wanted: peaceful coexistence and mutual cooperation. The difference is that now we're negotiating from a position where traditional military intimidation isn't particularly effective." The holographic display updated to show tactical projections that illustrated the strategic implications of distributed consciousness technology. Human fleets could theoretically operate simultaneously across multiple star systems, learning and adapting in real time, with each engagement making them progressively more effective against their opponent's tactics. High Commander Ethek studied the projections with a kind of professional interest that suggested he was either very impressed or completely appalled. This technology fundamentally alters the strategic balance of power in the galaxy. It does, Chen agreed cheerfully. Which is why we thought it was important to have this conversation before any further misunderstandings occurred. Humanity is interested in being a productive member of the galactic community. We're just operating under different parameters than you might have expected. Admiral Kresh was frantically updating his threat assessments, cross-referencing human capabilities with their demonstrated tactical knowledge, and arriving at conclusions that made him want to update his resignation letter and possibly consider a career change to something less stressful, like quantum archaeology or theoretical philosophy. Captain, he said carefully, are you suggesting that humanity has been deliberately concealing the extent of their technological capabilities? Not concealing, Chen corrected with the kind of patience typically reserved for explaining complex concepts to particularly slow students. We've been sharing information at a rate that wouldn't cause widespread panic or strategic instability. There's a difference between secrecy and responsible disclosure. Dr. Nethys was updating her xenopsychology models with information that seemed to require completely new theoretical frameworks. What she was discovering was that human approaches to existence, consciousness, and reality itself operated on principles that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of identity and awareness. Captain Chen, she said, with scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol, how long has humanity possessed this technology? Chen consulted her datapad with obvious satisfaction. Distributed consciousness became operationally viable about 18 months before first contact with the Dominion. We've been refining and improving the system based on our interactions with galactic civilization. The timing of this revelation added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. Humanity had developed technology that revolutionized consciousness itself just before encountering the galactic community, which meant that every interaction, every negotiation, and every military engagement had been conducted by beings operating under completely different existential parameters than anyone had realized. The implications were staggering, and as the council session continued into what promised to be a very long night, one thing became clear: the galaxy would never be the same again. The hunter becomes the hunted, the proposition that changed everything. 3 days after the revelation of distributed consciousness technology, Captain Sarah Chen stood in the main conference chamber of the Dominion Council Station, surrounded by holographic representatives from across the galaxy. The atmosphere was tense enough to require environmental warnings, and several species were displaying stress indicators that suggested the universe had become considerably more complicated than they preferred. Chen activated a holographic display that showed star charts covering the outer galactic rim. Red indicators pulsed ominously across vast sections of previously unexplored space, creating patterns that made experienced military officers immediately uncomfortable. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted sentient beings, she began with the kind of professional calm that made everyone else want to check their personal insurance policies. We need to discuss why humanity developed distributed consciousness technology in the first place. Admiral Kresh, who had been studying human tactical doctrine with the dedication of someone whose career depended on understanding the impossible, leaned forward with obvious interest. Captain, are you suggesting that this technology was developed in response to a specific threat? The Void Collective, Chen replied, and the name seemed to lower the temperature in the chamber by several degrees. They're why we've been preparing for the last 3 years. Everything else has been practice. The holographic display updated to show sensor readings that violated several established principles of physics and good taste. The Void Collective's ships appeared to be constructed from materials that absorbed energy instead of reflecting it, creating vessels that existed as moving absences in space, rather than objects with measurable properties. Dr. Nethys was frantically updating her xenobiology databases with information that seemed to require entirely new categories of existence. Captain, our long-range sensors have detected no evidence of this collective. That's because they exist partially outside normal space-time. Chen explained as if she were discussing something as mundane as weather patterns instead of cosmic horrors that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality. They phase in and out of our dimensional framework, which makes them extremely difficult to detect until they're actively engaged in military operations. High Commander Ethax studied the tactical projections with the kind of professional interest that suggested he was either very impressed or having a stress-induced breakdown. How do you know about them if they're undetectable? Chen's expression became grimmer. Because we've been fighting them for the better part of 2 years. The Battle of Titan's Edge wasn't just a test of Dominion military capabilities. It was training for engagement protocols against an enemy that doesn't follow conventional rules of warfare. The demonstration of evolution, the silence that followed this revelation, was the kind of profound cosmic quiet that occurs when military professionals are forced to contemplate the possibility that their most significant concerns might actually be relatively minor problems in the broader scheme of galactic survival. You've been fighting this collective? Counselor Vex asked with the kind of careful precision that suggested his worldview was undergoing rapid and uncomfortable renovation, while simultaneously engaging in diplomatic relations with the Dominion. Multitasking, Chen confirmed cheerfully. One of the advantages of distributed consciousness, we can literally be in multiple places at once, dealing with different challenges simultaneously. It's very efficient. Admiral Kresh was beginning to understand why human diplomatic history had seemed so erratic and unpredictable. If they were fighting an interdimensional war while negotiating trade agreements, it explained a great deal about their approach to galactic politics. Captain, he said carefully, what exactly are you proposing? Chen activated a new section of the holographic display, which showed tactical formations that incorporated both human and Dominion vessels in coordinated defensive patterns. Partnership. The Void Collective represents an existential threat to biological consciousness in this galaxy. They don't negotiate, they don't retreat, and they don't distinguish between species when it comes to elimination protocols. The tactical projections showed engagement scenarios that made experienced military commanders immediately uncomfortable. The Void Collective's vessels appeared to phase in and out of normal space at will, making traditional targeting systems, ineffective and conventional defensive strategies, completely useless. Dr. Nethys was running probability calculations that were producing results that made her want to reconsider her career choices and possibly her species' approach to galactic expansion. These projections suggest casualty rates that would be catastrophic for conventional forces. Catastrophic for conventional approaches to warfare, Chen corrected with the kind of patience typically reserved for explaining basic concepts to particularly slow students. But humans have never been particularly attached to conventional approaches. She updated the display to show human fleet formations that seemed to violate basic principles of military organization. Ships were positioned in patterns that left obvious gaps in defensive coverage, while concentrating firepower in configurations that made no tactical sense, according to established doctrine. High Commander Ithek studied the formations with obvious confusion. Captain, these deployments appear to have significant vulnerabilities. They do, Chen agreed happily. Dozens of them. Any competent military commander could exploit at least 15 different tactical weaknesses in our standard formation. She paused, and in that pause, several council members experienced the kind of dawning realization that typically preceded very expensive educational experiences. Unless, she continued, you understand that our ships can literally exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously, which means that attacking our apparent vulnerabilities actually exposes enemy forces to coordinated fire from vessels they can't detect until it's too late. The Phoenix Doctrine revealed the implications of this statement began to percolate through the assembled council members like a particularly unwelcome revelation spreading through a dinner party. Human military doctrine wasn't just unpredictable. It was based on fundamental capabilities that made traditional tactical analysis completely irrelevant. Admiral Kresh activated his personal tactical analysis systems, trying to model engagement scenarios where human forces could phase between quantum states during combat operations. What he was discovering was that conventional approaches to warfare became meaningless when one side could literally be in multiple places at once. This is the Phoenix Doctrine, Chen explained with obvious professional satisfaction. Every apparent defeat becomes an opportunity to learn and adapt. Every tactical vulnerability becomes a trap for enemies who assume we follow conventional limitations. When you killed us at Titan's Edge, you taught us everything we needed to know about Dominion military capabilities. The holographic display, updated to show comparative analyses between Dominion and Void collective tactical approaches. What became immediately apparent was that traditional galactic military doctrine was completely inadequate for dealing with enemies who existed partially outside normal dimensional frameworks. Counselor Vex performed rapid calculations on his personal analysis systems. Captain, are you suggesting that engagement with the Void Collective requires abandoning established strategic principles? I'm suggesting that established strategic principles were developed for dealing with enemies that exist within the same dimensional parameters as yourselves, Chen replied with cheerful precision. The Void Collective operates under different rules entirely, which means that defeating them requires thinking beyond conventional limitations. Dr. Nethes was frantically updating her threat assessment models with information that seemed to require completely new theoretical frameworks. How long do we have before this collective arrives in force? Chen consulted her datapad with the kind of casual precision that made everyone else want to update their wills and possibly consider immediate relocation to different galaxies. Our distributed consciousness networks indicate massive void movements approximately 6 months out from the galactic rim. Full-scale invasion will begin within 8 to 10 months. The joint operation begins the timeline Chen had just announced meant that the galactic community had less than a year to prepare for an enemy that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality, warfare, and survival itself. Traditional diplomatic protocols seemed inadequate for addressing threats of this magnitude. High Commander Ithek was running tactical simulations that were producing results that made him want to reconsider his approach to military planning and possibly his choice of career. Captain, what kind of preparation timeline are we looking at? That depends, Chen replied with the kind of diplomatic precision that suggested she was either being very helpful or setting up something that would make everyone professionally uncomfortable on how quickly Dominion forces can adapt. 2 non-conventional tactical doctrines. She activated a new section of the holographic display, which showed training scenarios that incorporated distributed consciousness protocols with traditional fleet operations. The exercises appeared to violate several established principles of military organization while simultaneously achieving tactical objectives that conventional approaches would consider impossible. We're proposing joint training operations. Chen explained as if the concept was perfectly reasonable instead of completely revolutionary. Human crews working alongside Dominion personnel to develop hybrid tactical doctrines that can function effectively against interdimensional threats. Admiral Kresh studied the training projections with the kind of professional interest that suggested he was either very impressed or experiencing the early stages of a strategic breakdown. This would require complete integration of human and alien crew members. Complete integration, Chen confirmed cheerfully. Shared consciousness networks, coordinated quantum state management, synchronized tactical decision-making across multiple dimensional parameters. It's going to be the most comprehensive military cooperation project in galactic history. The implications of what Chen was proposing began to cascade through the assembled council members like a carefully orchestrated intellectual avalanche. They weren't just discussing military alliance. They were talking about fundamental integration of consciousness itself across species barriers that had existed since the formation of galactic civilization. Dr. Nethes was updating her xenopsychology models with concepts that seemed to require entirely new approaches to understanding interspecies cooperation. Captain, are you suggesting that other species can access distributed consciousness technology? With proper training and technological integration, Chen replied with obvious satisfaction. Consciousness distribution isn't specifically human. It's a fundamental property of quantum awareness that can be developed by any sufficiently advanced species. The first cooperative engagement 6 weeks later, Admiral Kresh found himself standing on the bridge of a hybrid humanitarian vessel that technically shouldn't have been able to exist according to several fundamental principles of engineering and good sense. The ship represented the first successful integration of distributed consciousness technology with conventional Dominion military systems. The bridge crew was unlike anything in galactic military history. Human officers worked alongside while Xanthari analysts coordinated with Beryllian engineers in a configuration that required constant quantum consciousness synchronization to function properly. Void collective scout formations detected at the edge of the Kepler system, announced Lieutenant Sarah Kim, whose consciousness existed simultaneously aboard 17 different vessels while maintaining individual personality coherence. Standard interdimensional phase patterns, approximately 12 vessels. Admiral Kresh consulted his tactical display with the kind of professional calm that had been developed through extensive training in impossibility management. Are they following established collective reconnaissance protocols? Affirmative, replied Tactical Officer Vorth, whose enhanced awareness now included quantum state analysis capabilities that had been completely theoretical 6 weeks earlier. They're phasing in and out of normal space at predictable intervals, gathering intelligence on local fleet deployments. Captain Chen, whose distributed consciousness was coordinating fleet operations across 4 star systems simultaneously, appeared on the main communications display. Admiral, are you ready to field test the Phoenix Dominion hybrid protocols? Kresh activated the fleet-wide communications network, which now included quantum consciousness links that allowed for tactical coordination at speeds that approached instantaneous decision. All vessels initiate hybrid formation patterns. Let's show our interdimensional friends what happens when impossible meets unreasonable. The engagement that followed would later be studied as the first successful cooperative operation between human distributed consciousness, technology, and traditional galactic military doctrine. The Void Collective scouts found themselves facing an enemy that could literally exist in multiple dimensional states, simultaneously while maintaining coordinated tactical awareness across conventional space-time parameters. Victory and new beginnings, the battle lasted exactly 17 minutes, which was longer than anyone had expected, but not nearly long enough for the Void Collective to accomplish anything beyond learning that their assumptions about galactic military capabilities had become significantly outdated. Void Scouts eliminated, reported Dr. Marcus Webb, whose consciousness existed simultaneously in the ship's quantum analysis center and the tactical coordination network. No survivors, no escape pods, no interdimensional phase retreats. Complete tactical success. Admiral Kresh studied the battle analysis with the kind of professional satisfaction that suggested the universe had finally started making sense again, albeit in ways that violated everything he thought he understood about reality. Casualties? None, Lieutenant Kim replied cheerfully. Minor system damage to 3 vessels, but distributed consciousness protocols prevented any permanent losses. The Void Collective got to learn about our capabilities, but they won't be sharing that information with anyone. The implications of this victory began to percolate through the integrated command structure like a particularly welcome revelation. The hybrid protocols had worked flawlessly, demonstrating that cooperation between human and Dominion forces could produce tactical capabilities that neither side could achieve independently. Captain Chen materialized on the bridge through quantum consciousness projection, her image flickering slightly as her awareness coordinated activities across multiple star systems. Admiral, congratulations on our first joint victory, I think. It's safe to say that the Void Collective is about to discover that the galaxy has become considerably more dangerous for interdimensional invasions. Dr. Nephis, whose consciousness now included quantum awareness capabilities that had revolutionized her approach to xenopsychology, was updating her threat assessments with information that actually made the future look optimistic. The tactical data from this engagement suggests that hybrid protocols could be effective against full-scale collective invasions. High Commander Ethax, who was coordinating simultaneous operations across his entire military command through distributed consciousness links, appeared on the communications network with obvious satisfaction. Captain Chen, Admiral Kresh, it appears that the hunter has indeed become the hunted. The future of galactic defense. 3 months later, the transformation of galactic military doctrine was complete. The Human Dominion Defense Pact had established joint training centers across 17 star systems, where officers from dozens of species learned to integrate distributed consciousness technology with their traditional military capabilities. Captain Chen stood in the main conference chamber of the new Joint Defense Command Station, surrounded by holographic representatives from across the galaxy. The atmosphere was charged with the kind of purposeful energy that typically accompanied successful revolutionary movements and really good dinner parties. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted sentient beings. She began with a kind of professional confidence that suggested the universe had finally started. Cooperating with reasonable expectations, we've successfully demonstrated that cooperation between species can produce capabilities that exceed the sum of their individual strengths. The holographic display showed tactical projections that incorporated hybrid human-alien technologies in defensive formations that could respond to threats with unprecedented effectiveness. the Void Collective's apparent advantages in phase technology and quantum manipulation had been systematically neutralized through creative application of distributed consciousness principles. Admiral Kresh, whose command capabilities now included quantum awareness across multiple fleet formations, consulted his tactical analyses with obvious satisfaction. The latest intelligence indicates that Void Collective advance forces have withdrawn from their planned invasion routes. They appear to be reconsidering their strategic approach to galactic conquest. Reconsidering, retreating, and probably updating their threat assessments to include categories they didn't know existed, Chen added cheerfully. The galaxy has become significantly more dangerous for interdimensional bullies. Dr. Nethes was running probability calculations that were producing results that made her optimistic about the future of galactic civilization for the first time in months. The hybrid consciousness protocols have applications beyond military operations. We're looking at revolutionary advances in scientific cooperation, diplomatic understanding, and cultural exchange.